Hello, everybody out there. I have returned from my hiatus. I spent the month of October traveling across the country with my family, and I spent the month of November kind of just processing all of those experiences that I was having and just kind of internalizing that and trying to draw out of it, some type of wisdom, something that can help me in my journey. And so during that time too, I just did another show with Nish, her boots on the ground thing, where I went over, a lot of my trip and some of the things that I witnessed and experienced on that trip. It was still pretty fresh off the trip. So then I had an opportunity just recently to go and do the Strange Mosaic show with Emily Moyer. And I got into my trip a little bit, but I really had more time to flesh out some deeper understandings and some things that I took away from my experiences on her show. And so that was really nice to be able to do that. I just have been kind of in a period of just going inside myself and really not wanting to interact with the external reality any more than I really have to. And so I've kept my attention on myself and less on what's going on. Like I understand what's going on to some degree, but I'm really not paying as much attention, to it as I used to. And so now I'm, coming to a period where I kind of want to get back into engaging, at least looking at this reality and some of the things about it, using that to inform myself on this journey that I'm on, and always trying to draw something bigger, a greater truth from the things that I look into, even though they may feel at times like I'm drilling down into something and focusing too narrowly. It always seems to lead to this wider understanding of things. And so I really like how that works. Drilling down causes you to pull even further back and see a bigger mosaic. And, each piece is important along the journey. So, sometimes I feel like, I want to concentrate on, the bigger picture of reality and how it works, and not so much on the the minutia. But sometimes looking into the minutia helps inform, the larger view of things. So it's like always good to get that fresh perspective on something that you're looking at. And sometimes people can share things with me through an experience, and I measure it against my own experience, whether it validates mine or gives me validation, or it causes me to question my own experience and start to look at it from a different perspective. And by doing that, sometimes I can pull out things that I missed initially because I wasn't looking at it in this new way. So sometimes, I like to get back into the reality and start to pick it apart and look at it, because I do feel like it synchronistically works with the bigger picture. And so I had come across a couple things while I was on hiatus. And before we left on our trip, I had been rewatching, I guess, the show The Sopranos, and just really trying to pull out all of these nuggets from the show, because there's a lot of stuff in that show that informs the greater reality, archetypes, and all kinds of other things. And so I was watching this show, and then I finished it when we got back, and I'm still processing all of the stuff from my trip. And there was a poem in one of the episodes of The Sopranos by W.B. Yeats, and it's called The Second Coming. I looked it up because I knew I'd heard it before somewhere, and I heard it on The Sopranos. And so I looked it up because it was bugging me, but not until I'd heard it in several other shows that I was also watching at the same time. So this poem was constantly being referenced and kept coming up for me over and over and over again, like 5 times in the span of a week, and twice in one day. This poem was mentioned in different places by different people. So I felt like there's something here that's trying to get my attention to this poem. And it's kind of fitting for, the times that we're in now. You can certainly see it being appropriate for any time where there is great turmoil in the world. And people always want to imagine the apocalypse is upon them. And that's kind of what this poem is getting at, that feeling of an ending, an apocalypse, a revealing and a beginning of a new cycle or a new chapter in the story, in the narrative that we're all living through. So anyway, I started to look into this poem, and I'll bring it up here. This is The Second Coming by W.B. Yeats. And I guess I'll just read it. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loose, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming, hardly are those words out when a vast image out of spiritus mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it real shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle, and what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born. So, this poem is very fitting for the time that we're in now and everything that's been going on. So I started to look into this poem and, see when it was written and what's going on with it, because I kept feeling like I'm being pushed to dig deeper on this thing. So, The Second Coming, written by W.B. Yeats in 1919. So 100 years ago, prior to what's going on right now, in early 2020, but it was starting in 2019. And so there's this 100-year resurgence of what was going on back at the time that he wrote this. So even in the Wikipedia article, it makes this connection. The poem is also connected to the 1918-1919 flu pandemic. In the weeks preceding Yeats' writing of the poem, his pregnant wife, Georgie Hyde Lees, caught the virus and was very close to death. The highest death rates of the pandemic were among pregnant women. In some areas, they had up to a 70% death rate. So a pregnant woman contracting the Spanish flu is, a high likelihood that she's going to die. So his wife, of course, is one of the lucky 30% that did not face certain death. So that was kind of the backdrop of when he wrote this. And I'd found this article that was also talking about how often this poem has been used in popular entertainment, literature, you name it. This poem has been used repeatedly. It's been quoted, referenced, what have you. I mean, so it's clearly a very important poem to the people that give us our culture. And so it's out there in the consciousness. But it says here in this article that 3 years before he died, this activist woman, Ethel Mannon, so he was 70 at the time, and he had won a Nobel Prize in literature. And so she wanted him to join this campaign to free a German pacifist that was incarcerated by the Nazis. And so he responded with a reading recommendation. If you have read my poems, if you have my poems by you, look up a poem called The Second Coming, he wrote. It was written some 16 or 17 years ago and foretold what is happening. I have written of the same thing again and again since. This will seem little to you with your strong practical sense, for it takes 50 years for a poet's weapons to influence the issue. And I really found that quote interesting, how he looks at poetry as a weapon to influence the issue, or I guess we could insert the word narrative. So he wants to influence the narrative with his poetry, because he's not writing poetry just to express himself. He's writing poetry to influence the narrative. So he's obviously got an agenda. What that is, well, maybe we can sort of suss that out here when we get into like who he was. But, I just found this interesting that it was, happening again, being referenced quite often in some recent shows. I think two of them that I can think of from Apple TV. I think one of them was the Foundation, which was from an Isaac Asimov book, and they used the poem in this show, which is interesting because this is taking place in a reality that's different. It's a fantasy, a fictional reality. So it's interesting that they referenced it and used it there. Like it's the whole show itself is really about the end of the empire and the rise, of this new Atlantis. We see this story, and I'm going to get into that and some of this other stuff, but it starts to become like a pattern, as you'll see. So anyway, he was writing this poem during the time where the First World War was barely over, the Russian Revolution was unfolding, and there was another war brewing on his doorstep in Ireland. And so the Irish Parliament met in Dublin to declare independence. So this was like local stuff, but there was unrest and there was war and revolution going on at this time. And of course, then you had the pandemic on top of all of this stuff. And so that's kind of the backdrop. And it says the birth of his daughter, Anne, in February was also freighted with danger. And it's, referencing her pregnancy having been stricken by the Spanish flu. But luckily, she survived, whereas many people did not, so that he could have his heir. That's why he married this woman. She was much younger than he was. He was 50 when he married this woman, and she was like 25. But he had been engaged in some sort of back and forth proposals with a 15-year-old the same year he asked this woman to marry him. And this was all because the woman he was really in love with ran off and married some other guy. And so now he's just settling for somebody that he can have children with and to carry on his name. So it says, these events conspired to put him in an apocalyptic frame of mind. So that's important, right? His perception and his frame of mind, what's going on. And so he found the metaphors to express it via hundreds of automatic writing sessions, during which Georgie, his wife, convinced her husband that she was channeling the wisdom of controls and instructors from the spirit realm. From these sessions, Yeats constructed an elaborate world-explaining system, which he eventually laid out in bewildering detail in A Vision, 1925. Crucial to the Second Coming was the symbol of the gyre, a cone or spiral, and Yeats' conviction that history moved in a 2,000-year cycle. The age of Christ, 20 centuries of stony sleep, was coming to an end, and a new era, antithetical to progress and reason, would begin with the birth of the rough beast. So he was really envisioning that he was living through, this apocalyptic time. And he came up with this idea of 2,000-year cycles. And not only that, a world explaining system. So this is happening in like 1919, and his wife is channeling, and they're getting this entire download of information, explaining how this reality works, how the system is set up. And this is very reminiscent of some of his contemporaries that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight the fact that this poem, when he wrote it, he was in an apocalyptic frame of mind. So they're contacting something that they don't quite understand. The way that they understand what they're experiencing and what's being channeled through them is through this filter that the apocalypse is upon them. And so, whether they thought they were talking to a spirit or an angel of God, messenger telling them of the pending doom that was coming, or they were simply trying to relate what they experienced in a context that they understand and that they think other people can understand. So something gets lost in the transmission of this knowledge that's being imparted through the channeling, because it's colored by your perceptions of the world and how you thought the world worked. So whatever you experience or read or see in a vision, it has to be filtered through, you have to anthropomorphize things. That's why the book of Enoch is, him flying around with an angel, and the angel is showing him how the world works, how this earth, this system, this construct is set up, and more in the spiritual sense, in the spiritual dimension, and how that all connects to the physical. This is basically what is happening here with Yeats and his wife, and this is happening again and again and again, as we'll see. So he's operating. He was born in 1865, and so he's an Irish guy. But this is just after, like, maybe at the tail end of the Civil War, end of the Civil War in America. And so by the 1880s, he's of that age where he's beginning to start to write and have some influence. And yeah, so he marries this woman. They met through a mutual friend, Olivia Shakespeare, which I don't know if there's any relation, but she's an English playwright. So I don't know, maybe she comes from the Shakespearean line, if Shakespeare was even, like a real person. And people were warning her, not to marry this guy. But they got married, and it was a success in spite of the age difference. They went on to have these two kids, and the one that she was pregnant with during the pandemic, and then Michael. And he ran around on her. He was kind of he was having affairs with all kinds of women. So the marriage seemed to be like a marriage of convenience or arrangement. But this is what I found interesting about this woman. Because we know she's channeling, right? And all of this automatic writing is going on. It's really like all of his poetry and everything that he won awards for was just channeled material. He would take all of this channeled stuff and he would put it into a poem. So he can't even really take credit for it, because it's just disseminating, this occulted information, this knowledge. So I really, I haven't read a lot of his stuff. I mean, I wasn't really familiar with him. So this next part, a lot of people already knew this about Yeats. Maybe it's common knowledge. I just didn't care enough to really look at it. So it turns out that, in 1887, his parents are in London. And then in March 1890, he joins the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and with Ernest Rhys co-founded the Rhymers Club, poets who met regularly in Fleet Street to recite their verses. And, it goes on to talk about, this club, but he had a lifelong interest in mysticism, spiritualism, occultism, and astrology. He read extensively on the subjects throughout his life, became a member of the paranormal research organization, the Ghost Club, in 1911. That's something I want to look more into, the Ghost Club, whatever he was doing there. So, I mean, even early on, he was already interested in this stuff. And I would say that his family was also interested in this stuff. And that's why he took to it so young and so early. It's almost like he was raised in a certain worldview and a way of, teaching your children. If you're into the occult and you're teaching them from a young age, all of these things that you have learned through your experience, these kids are much better placed and prepared to be on the world stage and to have a part in influencing the narrative. As we see, that's how he sees his poetry. It's a weapon to influence the narrative. So it's like he was bred for this. It's like he said, if I had not made magic my constant study, I could not have written a single word of my Blake book, nor would the Countess Kathleen ever have come to exist. The mystical life is the center of all that I do and all that I think and all that I write. His mystical interests, also inspired by his study of Hinduism under the theosophist Mohini Chatterjee, and the occult, formed much of the basis of his late poetry. Some critics disparaged this aspect of his work. So he was deeply involved in the occult, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Ghost Club. He's getting into the teachings of this theosophist. And, you had Blavatsky was around at this time in the 1880s. She was at the end of her life. I think she died in 1890, the year he joined the Order, the Golden Dawn. So Blavatsky probably was a heavy influence on him. And so anyway, 1885, he was involved in the formation of the Dublin Hermetic Order. The society held its first meeting on 16 June, with Yeats acting as its chairman. The same year, the Dublin Theosophical Lodge was opened in conjunction with Brahmin Mohini Chatterjee, who traveled from the Theosophical Society in London to lecture. Yeats attended his first seance the following year. He later became heavily involved with the Theosophy and with Hermeticism, particularly with the eclectic Rosicrucianism of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So Rosicrucianism, I mean, that's going to play into this ongoing narrative. During seances held from 1912, a spirit calling himself Leo Africanus apparently claimed it was Yeats' daemon or anti-self, inspiring some of the speculations in Per Amica Salentia Lunae. He was admitted to the Golden Dawn in March 1890 and took the magical motto, Daemon est deus inversus, translated as devil is God inverted. He was an active recruiter for the sect's Isis Urania temple and brought in his uncle George Polexfen, Maud Known, and Florence Farr. Although he reserved a distaste for abstract and dogmatic religions founded around personality cults, he was attracted to the type of people he met at the Golden Dawn. He was involved in the order's power struggles, both with Farr and MacGregor Mathers, and was involved when Mathers sent Aleister Crowley to repossess Golden Dawn paraphernalia during the Battle of Blythe Road. After the Golden Dawn ceased and splintered into various offshoots, Yeats remained with the Stella Matutina until 1921. So here we have Crowley and Mathers and these people who were, the influential occultists of that time. And he's right in the thick of this with people. So, Yeats is an interesting guy. I don't know where he fell in this Battle of Blythe Road or what was going on, but clearly there were differing opinions about how to go about influencing the narrative. Crowley had one idea and, he took the left-hand path and he was going, exploring the dark side, like Anakin Skywalker. And of course, Yeats doesn't seem to really have gone down that route. He wasn't really into what Crowley was into, but, he obviously had some experiences with his anti-self or his daemon. That's pretty interesting, that this has influenced his work. So all that being said, to just sort of explain, why is it that this guy's poetry, and especially this one poem, has been so widely referenced and used throughout the years since it was written? And I think that all of this plays into that. This guy was a player and he was involved with creating a narrative for the time that, was being destroyed. There was a destruction happening. It had been happening since the beginning of the 1800s and probably before. I mean, we can take it back to Francis Bacon and John Dee even. John Dee was really interested in discovering the new Atlantis here. And I think he knew exactly where to sail, but it was like he was using geomancy. He was looking for the places that were already here, that he already knew existed, because he had been scrying with Kelly and contacting these angels. He calls them angels. And he even calls his magic Enochian magic, referencing Enoch, which I already talked about. So we're starting to see a pattern where people are having contact with whatever they're calling spirit guides, angels, demons, ascended masters, whatever verbiage you want to put on it. We see a pattern where this happens throughout time, and it happens in, kind of like a resurgence of the occult happening. So the 1880s, around the tail end of the 1800s, there was this huge resurgence of interest in occultism and esotericism. And so you had guys like this that were really part of pushing that and using the revelations that were happening. I think it was probably that, these things, these angels were wanting to communicate, and that only certain people who had been sort of raised to understand how to communicate, how to contact, how to channel, how to do these things, they were privileged to understand how to know, when these things are reaching out. So they're putting themselves in the middle of this. So they're transmitting all of this information, and then it's being filtered through their personal perception of reality and how to use this information. And it seems like what they're getting is, how this system works, how this place is set up, what we are, what this is, and how they express it and how they relate that to people will depend on the time that they live in, and the things they can reference that will be relevant to people that are going to read this stuff that's being disseminated. But, we're going to see that he had contemporaries during that time as well, and that this was happening to them. So let's see, go here. I mean, Blavatsky, I mentioned her. She was a little bit before this class, right? She was already popularizing the occult. She had been born up in it. It's not like the occult ever went away. It's just that the general interest by more than a small group of people seems to fluctuate. And there are certain times where more people are just drawn to whatever energy is there that's being transmitted. People are starting to pick up on it and understand that something's happening. There's a change that's occurring. And these people, are just the ones that are capitalizing on this by hoarding the information and being the only ones to, really disseminate it. An argument can be made that they're trying to help us, and an argument can be made that they're trying to hurt us. Either way, I still think that their contributions are relevant to, the greater narrative. And so Steiner, right? Here's a guy, he's operating around the same time as Yates. And Steiner was, he was taking a different approach. He was getting like this entire system, how the spiritual side of this stuff worked, and what were the sides, and what was the issue. Like, he was getting deeper into the spiritual part of these, the philosophical part of it. And Walter Russell, also around that same time, a little bit later, he was getting all of this like almost scientific data on how energy, how the experience of reality is just energy that takes a form. And he was going through harmonics and had all of these diagrams basically showing like how the system works, like a machine, like a matrix, a construct. And so a lot of his work was very influential on, FPV Angel on YouTube, and their whole idea of, these angels are particle accelerators that are underground, and they are responsible for this reality, for the weather, for everything, for this realm, generating our experience here. And, so a lot of these things are underneath major cities. I think here in DC, there's very likely a particle accelerator underneath like the Washington Monument and the mall there. It was a very significant location for George Washington. And, for the people that were running the show at the time of the American Revolution, this place was very important because there was already stuff here. And, that's becoming clearer and clearer, that they just discovered things that were already there, and then came up with a story that they were going to use to create the new narrative, right? That they did it, or that, one generation, think about this, to rewrite a narrative is to take something that is accepted by most people, and then 3 to 4 generations, that's about 80 years. By an 80-year span of time, you can completely change the narrative of your reality. Through each successive generation forgets a little bit more and a little bit more of their ancestors' wisdom, until the point that all of the new narratives that were being written and inserted have been absorbed and taught to the children and the grandchildren, until they forget that there was any other truth other than what they believe. So it's not really that difficult, to successfully change the narrative of something. So these people, I think, were involved in rewriting a narrative. What their true intentions were, I really can't say. Even with Aleister Crowley, what he was doing, was it evil? Who am I to judge that? One person's evil is another person's good. So whatever was going on, we're starting to see a pattern, though, emerge. Like around this time, this is when all of the expos and World's Fairs were going on. So they're showcasing, the new narrative for the new generation. Then you've got the whole Tartaria thing and the orphan trains. And so you got the orphans coming in and they're being trained in the new narrative, and they're going to be, the new ruling class for the new age. And then, of course, they recruit and train the managerial classes, which is what's going on at like the World's Fairs and expos. They're like training and telling the new management class of society on what the new narratives are going to be about what's going on. And so you see how this works. And so this is kind of bring me into talking about this tweet that I saw that kind of ties into all of this. And so this is like going to connect in a way. At least I hope that it will. And so around the same time, maybe before this, right, early 1800s, I saw this 1804. So this is from Twitter, analog 1_analog9. I don't know who that is, but 1804, star forts of the West, not designed for fortification. So I was intrigued because I had been looking at star forts for a while and really starting to wonder about the narrative of when these things were supposedly built and what they were designed and used for. And so this article that this person found, I guess, was published in 1804 in the Washington Advertiser. And somebody scanned it. I don't know, so like I'm starting to question a lot of things. Like, how can I trust that this isn't just some manufactured thing by the AI just to satisfy my theory? Like the reality is providing you the evidence that you need to justify your view. I don't know, but I was looking at this article, and I'm not going to read the article because it's like really hard to read. The S's look like F's, and it's older English, so I struggle a little bit. But this one here I will read. But this was a letter on the supposed fortifications of the Western country from Bishop Madison of Virginia to Dr. Barton from the American Philosophical Transactions. And so what this article is about is in 1804, the people of that time, the scholars, the philosophers, the historians, they were sort of in agreement that these star forts and a lot of these Tartarian type buildings and structures, but I think he's talking more specifically about the star forts. But that's not to exclude all of this other stuff that was already here when people got here, right? And he's talking about how the consensus is with these intellectuals that these things were built as fortifications. But what's apparent is that they're all agreed that these things are ancient, from an ancient culture that they don't have any clue about. And so they're just trying to make up a theory as to what these things would have been built and used for. And so they came up with this idea that it was a fortification or a military fort of some kind. And this guy, this bishop, Bishop Madison, he's saying that you can't assume that, and that he gives all these reasons why these things were probably not designed for military fortification, because the way that they're built just doesn't suggest that they would be, that they had a completely different purpose, which is also what a lot of researchers are saying, is that, star forts were not military bases. They were actually, energy centers, and, for healing and other types of things. So as the English are just now bitterly lamenting once more that their sea-coast fortifications are useless against modern weapons of offense, a pause of reflection might profitably be made in the wail constantly going up in this country concerning our own antiquated fortifications. England has spent 100 millions upon these ramparts. We have saved that sum and are just as well off. And perhaps it would be as wise for us to proceed cautiously until we are able to possess a comfortable assurance of the knowledge of building defenses that shall defend against the new inventions of gunnery. So what's happening here is that these star forts, before anybody really knew where they came from or what they were supposed to be used for, the consensus came out, the narrative came out that they were built as fortifications. And so the military began using them as such. So they started putting cannons out there and adding brick structures to these things for quarters and things to house troops and officers and horse stables and stuff. Basic things that, these people could have built in a short amount of time during this period, but not the massive, walls of stone. They're not building those things. They're just using these things as fortifications. And what he's really getting at here is that, the English are talking about their fortifications, the ones that predate their, existence, and how much money they'd spent on like refurbishing them and outfitting them to be used as fortifications, only to find out that their initial foundation and design aren't really going to protect them from modern guns. So anyway, it's like his concern is more economic and how they're saving money by not, trying to use all of these star forts as fortifications. But the prevailing wisdom of the time was that they were built to be fortifications. And so a lot of money probably was dumped into making them at least have the appearance of being a fort, right? Some of the stories in these are ridiculous. They blow them up themselves because they didn't want the enemy to have them. Like, why would you blow up your own fort, especially one you put a bunch of money into? And then they, only to rebuild it again. So the War of 1812 was kind of the story behind these star forts. The official narrative is that these things were built after the War of 1812, some of them just before, to protect the capital of DC and surrounding places from attack by the British. But then you had the War of 1812 and the British attacked, bypassing the fort entirely. But so that the British wouldn't have access to their cool fort that was supposed to defend against the British, they blow it up. But then I guess the British just leave and everything goes back to normal. And now they're like, well, we need to build a bunch more of these things and put them everywhere. And we just need fortifications all over the United States. They could attack from rivers and, so like none of that makes sense, right? America's a massive landmass. There's no way the British are going to go sailing up the Mississippi and some of these other rivers and start attacking these tiny little forts. They're out in the middle of nowhere in some cases. So it's not like it's a really high trafficked area. Anyway, it just calls into question the narrative. And this is just another piece of evidence that just surfaces, right? When I'm starting to look into some things and this just pops up. And I thought it was interesting. So I also am reading this and I'm thinking, okay, but this was like one article that's, really kind of laying it out there that everybody knew in 1804 that star forts were built by a race of people. He even says it in the article that, they were built by a race of people long since disappeared. That's what he says. That is what the people of the American Philosophical Society, which he is a member of, and he is writing to those people in this article. So he's talking to his peers and he's telling them, we need to rethink what we're going to use these things that we found for. And I guess he didn't win that debate. So who was this guy? Who was Bishop Madison of Virginia? So I went and I'm looking for who this guy is. And it turns out his name is James Madison, Bishop James Madison, August 27th, 1749 to 1812. So he dies right before the War of 1812. He was the first bishop of the Diocese of Virginia of the Episcopal Church in the US, and one of the first bishops to be consecrated to the new church after the American Revolution. He also served as the 8th president of the College of William and Mary, which is the college my sister actually went to. In 1780, Madison was elected to the American Philosophical Society. So there he is. He is a member. He's a peer of the people that he's writing to. So he was born here near Staunton, Virginia, educated at home and a private school in Maryland before attending William and Mary, where he graduated with high honors in 1771. So, I mean, the revolution is still happening. I mean, this guy is sort of right around that time where George Washington is also spending an inordinate amount of time going from Star Fort to Star Fort and Indian Mound to Indian Mound. That seems to be all Washington's job really was to, map the land, visit the sites, catalog the things, the histories, the lore, negotiate with the tribal peoples, and try to buy a lot of the land that these things were on in order for the government to, or the crown or whoever to outright claim, rights to the site or to the structure or whatever. And I think that's really what Washington's main job was. Don't get me wrong, he was certainly deep into the occult, and he knew, he was probably a geomancer himself, but he was not just running around just fighting people and leading battles. I think his main job was really undercover to, map the realm and put his stamp on it. So this guy is around this time, he's rising to prominence himself. And he received the gold medal prize for classical learning by the Royal Governor of Virginia, known as Lord Boutetourt. I don't even know how to pronounce that. He read law with George Wyeth and was admitted to the bar, though he did not practice law. He was a cousin of James Madison, the 4th president of the United States. So that's his cousin. And it says, although he was not generally regarded as one of the founding fathers, his role is in successfully helping restructure and lead both the College of William and Mary and the Church of England in the United States during and after the American Revolution was a major contribution to the new country, the new Atlantis. In modern times, the Bishop James Madison Society, a secret society which was founded in 1812 immediately after his death, is named for him. So here, the guy that wrote this article that was arguing with his peers about what to do with these ancient structures, this guy was also part of, creating the narrative. But it appears that maybe he had a differing opinion. But as we can see, I don't think he won out on that one, because they went ahead with the narrative that these things were built for the defense of the United States. In his time, everybody understood that they were built by a race of long gone people. And even the natives didn't even really know a whole lot about them. They had lore and ancestral tales of the people that had come before them. And those were all recorded and collected. So they were all aware of this. But in 80 years, from 1804, when he wrote this article, right before his death in 1812, right? And the War of 1812 was said to be the impetus for building all of these star forts. So we can see that the narrative was being rewritten shortly after this guy died. And then by 1880, it's conceivable that there's really nobody left except for a select group of people that knew the real, or the old truth, I guess I should say, of what was going on here. By 1880, all of the people that, you started to see the recruitment and training of the managerial classes, and the rising up of the new ruling classes, and the narratives were already being rewritten prior to that. And so I think even George Washington himself could be a fictional creation to sell the narrative. Honestly, at this point, I don't even know if he was a real guy, just like Shakespeare and some of these other people. How do you know? Like, if the narrative about a building is just ridiculous, then most of the narratives about these people are ridiculous as well. But I don't know. My conclusions, though, is that whatever is happening, something is going on where people are channeling. They're getting into contact with something, whatever you want to call that thing, and they're interpreting whatever download they're getting about this place, about how this place works, and how they're using it, and how they're going about handling that is really going to be determined by the way they view their reality. So, like, Yeats probably saw the occult differently than Crowley did. Crowley probably thought what he was doing was good, was ultimately going to bring about the changes necessary quicker. And maybe Yeats disagreed, and he thought there was a different way to bring about the change. But everybody's trying to bring about the change, and that's what they're using this information for. It's all connected. It's all tied into the idea of resets, or changing of ages, or whatever you want to say about it. I mean, this is definitely a big part of that. There are people whose job it is to write the new narratives. There's people whose job it is to tear down and destroy the old. That's what the Civil War was doing. That's what the War of 1812 was doing, the Revolutionary War. All these wars are just opportunities to destroy and erase history and relocate and move people from one place to another to control the migration of people. So wars have, many uses in shaping reality and erasing history. And then, of course, after you've done the destruction, you have to go through and you have to rewrite the story, the narrative. There's another guy who was operating around the same time as this guy, James Madison, maybe a little bit after. And let's see. Yeah, he was around the time, he was born probably close just before that guy died. So he would have been the next class. This is Henry Schoolcraft, and this will be the last one here. He's 1793 to 1864. So he's dying just after or in the middle of the Civil War. I don't know the dates on the Civil War, but around the 1860s. So he was a geographer, geologist, ethnologist, and noted for his early studies of Native American cultures, as well as for his 1832 expedition to the source of the Mississippi River, which there's an island in the middle of that lake and it's named after this guy. And there's some schoolcrafts that are still operating in the mining industry today. So this guy's lineage is deep in this country. He is also noted for his major 6-volume study of Native Americans published in the 1850s. So he served as an Indian agent in Michigan in 1822, and he married this mixed race woman of a prominent Scotch-Irish fur trader and an Ojibwe mother, herself a daughter of Ojibwe war chief Wabojig. I don't know how to pronounce that. And she taught Schoolcraft their language and about their culture. So this guy was really the guy that wrote the history and the culture of the Native Americans that we have today, what we think life was like, and what they thought and everything. There's probably truth in it, but this guy definitely had a hand in rewriting the narrative of the natives. And so we can thank this guy for, the depictions that we have today, and know very little about what was going on with Native American people, who they were, what their stories were. This guy was put in charge of doing that as the government was going through and, getting rid of them, moving them onto reservations, and just westernizing them and giving them, Christianity, and making them wear different clothing, and, just all of this stuff. The natives were very much a part of the New Atlantis, right? The program of whitewashing and eliminating and marginalizing and repackaging the pre-existing cultures for the new generation, the new era that was coming in. And so that's, all of that period of time was about destroying and rewriting. And this guy was in on it as well. And he was a member also of the American Philosophical Society. So, the American Philosophical Society is full of these people. I think that's kind of like the club of the narrative writers, the people who get to write new narratives and influence culture, creating culture, and running society through words and the things that they say. The things they say are important for you to read, like Yeats' poetry, right? Why was he so awarded and held up so high when other poets of the time, nobody's even heard of those people, and they probably have much better work? Or, objectively, maybe they don't, but still, why this guy? Was it because he was channeling all of this stuff? I don't know. But after he married this half Indian woman who had a relationship to the chief of the tribe, which was important, and he's writing 6-volume set on, the history of Native Americans and their culture. Well, then I guess that woman dies, and then he goes and he marries Mary Howard, and she was from a slaveholding family in South Carolina. And in 1860, she published the best-selling The Black Gauntlet, an anti-Uncle Tom's Cabin novel. So she's another one that is rewriting the narrative, right? She's promoting the Southern white racist slaveholder, person, which, as we're coming to find out, isn't really the truth of the narrative that was going on at the time, right? So this woman is playing a role, and she's a persona. She's epitomizing something that they're trying to sell to people as an idea of something that's going on, i.e. that everybody's, a racist in the South, and that they all want to own slaves and they don't see them as human beings, right? But that wasn't the truth, but they were manufacturing the narrative together, both of them. Now, anyway, this just something I wanted to throw together, a little video to put up there. Because I haven't done anything in a while. And, just thinking about this, though, with people writing narratives, what we're doing is going back and writing our own, because once we've accepted that it's a narrative, it's a fiction that's being told to us to shape our view of reality, then we can go and we can pick that reality apart, and we can build and write a new narrative of what might have been going on in the past, or what could conceivably going on right now, or what could possibly happen in the future. All of those things are really determined by the narrative that we want to tell ourselves. And our narrative, the one that we tell ourselves, has got to be the most important narrative that there is. It doesn't really matter what happened in the past. Whatever narrative you want to tell yourself, it should be one that supports something that you're trying to do within yourself. The past, the future, those things don't really matter as much as how can they inform the inner world and, the truth that resonates within certain things, and being able to discern between what's truth and what's fiction. It becomes so much easier when you start breaking it down, and things fit a certain way. You start to observe patterns and cycles. That's what all these people were observing. People were contacting some type of entity, spirit guide, angel, whatever. And I feel like right now we're starting to see a pattern repeating. We've got a pandemic. There's a huge resurgence in people looking into the occult, and esoteric stuff is just coming up all the time. And people are having synchronicities like crazy, and epiphanies and awakenings, and all of this stuff is happening for a reason. And I think there are times where this type of energy is there, it's available. It's just that, a lot of people don't really know to look for it, or to even what that they're feeling something, but they don't know what it is. If you know what it is, and you know when it's coming, and you know how to utilize it to your advantage, that's really what we're seeing with certain people that create culture. They know it's coming, and they're preparing themselves to benefit from it in whatever way they feel that is beneficial, right? Like I said, whether it's good or evil, that's subjective. Honestly, I mean, you can say it's objectively bad, okay, but if you understand that, ultimately there is no bad, pain and suffering are a good thing. They create growth within the person, within the individual's spirit. If there was no adversity, there was no enemy, there was no adversary, then what would we be doing? We wouldn't be growing and changing. Like bodybuilding, and you're not going to grow your muscles bigger and stronger by never doing anything to put strain and stress on the muscle, to rip the muscle tissue and then let it heal and grow on top of it, right? And it's a compounding effect. But if you want to end everyone's pain and suffering, well, wow, that sounds like a great statement. I want to end pain and suffering around the world. That sounds like a noble, wonderful thing. But from a person's perspective that sees pain and suffering as a necessary and vital part of this experience, you're evil. If you want to stop people from suffering, you're evil, because suffering is what creates change and transformation. Why would you want to rob me of that by making me safe and keeping me from all of the possible dangers? This is the situation we're in. We have a media and government telling us to be afraid but there's that desire to make you want to be safe, right? Safety is of the utmost concern to everyone. Oh, be safe, people keep saying to me now. Oh, be safe. I mean, people never used to say that to me. It's like, hey, have a great day. Yeah, be safe. I mean, so now everyone's concerned with safety, right? And so they'll do just about anything that they're told to do because they want a feeling of safety. They want a feeling that the government and the people that they gave their power away to are going to protect them from this big bad thing that they don't even realize the government made up. So you see that people just, I don't even know where I'm going with this whole thing, but I'm looking at the cycles that are repeating and the narratives that we tell ourselves. And I just don't think that we should limit ourselves to one kind of narrative. I'm starting to look at narratives that I've believed in, just never even questioned before, and really just pick them apart and say, can I even really trust that? And, somebody asked me the other day, can you name 3 things that you know for certain? And honestly, I could only name like 1 or 2. And those 2 are pretty much connected to one another. So I think in the end, though, we all have the power to create our own reality by writing our own narratives. And so, I'm not going to just accept narratives that have been given to us. I'm just going to write my own. Instead of trying to figure out what the real one was, I don't know that you're ever going to know what really happened, but you can get close to an idea of what happened and what was going on, right? And it could be as wild and impossible as you want it to be, because it doesn't matter. It's your narrative. Anyway, hopefully I'll be doing some more stuff, putting out some more videos in the near future, and my hiatus will probably come back at some point. I going through these cycles of not wanting to do anything and like going inward and then wanting to get into stuff. And, it's, for me, it's a process, and it builds upon each other like the muscle, right? It's just, I have to process certain things that are going on internally before I can go back and, pick apart the external reality. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you soon.